I was her best friend, but the truth, I wanted her husband the entire time. I used to scroll through her social media late at night with the sound off. Sometimes I'd watch her stories 2 or 3 times, not because I enjoyed them, but because I was looking for proof, evidence that her life was as fragile as I hoped. A pause too long between her sentences. A smile that didn't reach her eyes. A room behind her left messy. Small things she probably didn't even notice about herself. I noticed everything. That's the part people never admit. Envy isn't loud. It's patient. It sits in the dark, watching, collecting pieces. Her husband appeared in photos often enough that I started to recognize his clothes. The gray jacket he wore to work. The baseball cap he used when he looked tired. The way he always rested one hand on their son's back in group pictures, like he was keeping them anchored. He had that quiet type of steadiness I'd never managed to find in my own life. No drama, no chaos, just presence. I watched him from a distance long before we ever met. Online at first. Then in person, accidentally on purpose, once I figured out his commute pattern from a photo she posted on a Wednesday morning. None of this was illegal. Just attentive. That's what I told myself. That was the private part. The part I never said to anyone. I wanted what she had long before I wanted him. And I realized something else. I hadn't become her friend by accident. I had worked my way into her life with the quiet determination of someone who knows exactly what they're doing and hopes no one ever asks the right questions. The night Emma called me crying for the first time, I was already half asleep. The room was dark except for the blue light of my phone on the nightstand. The vibrating startled me more than the sound. I blinked at the screen. Emma, Pilates. For a moment, I thought about letting it go to voicemail. Then I pictured her face, the way she relied on me now, and, beneath that, the way he had been pulling back lately, answering slower. I picked up. "Hey," I said, voice rough. "Everything okay?" She inhaled, a shaky breath that crackled in my ear. "Sorry, did I wake you?" "It's fine," I lied, sitting up, bare feet hitting the cool floor. "What's going on?" "I think." She stopped. I heard her swallow. "I think something's wrong with me and Mark." I stood and walked to the kitchen, the tile cold under my soles. I turned on the small overhead light above the stove. It buzzed faintly. "What makes you say that?" I asked. She let the words spill in pieces. "Late nights." His phone turned face down. Jokes that felt a little too sharp. The way he seemed somewhere else even when he was next to her on the couch. "He says he's just tired," she said. "But I can feel it. You know, like he's already pulled away, just physically still here." Her voice broke on that last word. I leaned against the counter, fingers tracing a chip in the laminate. I knew exactly where he was most of those nights. I knew exactly what his tired looked like when he closed my door behind him. "He's been under a lot of pressure," I said, keeping my tone gentle. "Work's intense right now. Pitches, clients. It takes a toll." "I know," she said quickly. "I'm not trying to be unfair. It's just, I keep thinking if I were different, he wouldn't." She stopped herself, exhaled. "Sorry, this is pathetic." "It's not pathetic," I said. "You care." "That's not pathetic." The silence that followed stretched. I could hear a faint hum, probably her fridge, same as mine, and the soft static of the call. "Do you think I'm difficult?" she asked suddenly. Honest question. "You've seen us together. Be real." It would have taken one sentence to steady her. "No, you're fine. He's lucky." Instead, I let a beat pass. Just long enough to plant something. "I think," I said slowly, "you're intense about the people you love. You put a lot on yourself. Sometimes that can feel like pressure to someone who doesn't know how to handle it." "So you do think I'm too much?" she said. No anger, just a hollow resignation. "I think you're a lot," I said, choosing my words like I was being kind. "But in a good way, mostly. Maybe he's just not great at matching that. It doesn't mean you're wrong." I felt her absorb that. The shift. The way she moved the blame slightly onto herself and slightly onto him, right where I wanted it, in the space between them. "I just want him to talk to me," she whispered. "If he's unhappy, I want him to say it. Not just disappear while sitting next to me." I stared at the dark window over my sink, my own reflection faint in the glass. "Have you told him exactly that?" I asked. "Word for word? No crying, no accusations. Just what you said to me right now." "No," she admitted. "I always get too emotional." "Maybe try it," I said gently. "He might actually hear you." It sounded like advice. It also gave me something, a script she'd go use on him, a conversation that would unsettle him further. We talked a little more. When she finally hung up, she thanked me. Her voice was softer, less frantic. "You're a good friend," she said. I don't know what I'd do without you. The line went dead. I stood in my kitchen, phone warm in my hand, light humming above me. The next day, I waited. He texted me that afternoon during a break between meetings. Emma says she talked to you last night. I stared at the message preview for a moment before opening it. Yeah, I typed. She was upset. She loves you. She doesn't want to lose you. Dots appeared, vanished, came back. I'm not going anywhere, he wrote. But I'm not okay, either. How so? I sent back. He replied slower this time, in multiple bubbles, like the thoughts were tumbling out in pieces. Feels like I'm failing at everything. Work, home. I don't make anyone happy. I come home and it's like I'm already in trouble before I open the door. Anytime I zone out, it's what's wrong? Talk to me. I'm just tired of feeling like I'm never enough. He had never put it that clearly in person. I leaned back in my chair, office lights a little too bright, the low murmur of colleagues in nearby cubicles. She told me she's scared you're pulling away, I typed. That she doesn't know how to reach you anymore. Yeah, he replied. Maybe I am. There was the opening. A crack wide enough to put my hand through. If you ever want to talk, I wrote, properly, not as her friend, not as a client, just as someone who sees you doing your best. I'm here. No judgment. It was a careful sentence. I didn't say anything that would look bad on a screenshot. I didn't have to. He answered after a pause. Maybe I'll take you up on that, he wrote. I don't really have anyone else I can be honest with about everything. Anyone else. That phrase stayed with me the rest of the day, in meetings, in the elevator, in the mirror of the bathroom under fluorescent lights. Our conversations changed tone after that. He started messaging me more often about things that weren't working. Little vents, a meeting that went nowhere, a tantrum at bedtime, a fight about dishes that wasn't really about dishes. I asked small, targeted questions. What did you need in that moment? What did you want to say but didn't? Phrases you hear in therapy podcasts, sprinkled into casual text. He responded like someone starved for that kind of attention, the kind that wasn't asking him to fix something, just to describe it. She says I'm distant, he wrote one night. But anytime I try to talk, it turns into another fight about how I almost didn't talk. Like there's no right way to do it. That sounds exhausting, I typed, feeling like you can't get it right no matter what. Exactly, he replied. With you it's easier. No expectations. Of course there were expectations. They were just invisible to him. When he complained about feeling like a walking paycheck, I said, you're more than a provider, you know. When he talked about feeling trapped, I said, everyone deserves a life that actually feels like theirs. When he apologized for venting, I said, you don't have to apologize for needing something. Every sentence wore empathy on the surface and something sharper underneath. Emma kept coming to me too. Different channel. Same story. We had another argument, she'd say over coffee, stirring sugar into her cup so hard the spoon chimed. He said I stress him out. Like I'm the problem. I'm sure he's overwhelmed, I'd say. But that doesn't mean your needs are wrong. I feel crazy, she'd sigh. Like I'm watching my marriage fall apart and I'm the only one trying. I nodded, eyes soft, posture open, every inch the loyal friend. You're not crazy, I'd say. You're just the only one willing to say things out loud. Then I'd go home, lie in bed, and answer his messages about how unseen he felt. I lived in the space between their sentences, translating each one into something that widened the gap. The part I remember most clearly is how steady my breathing was. I sat in my car across from their townhouse, engine off, fingers resting lightly on the steering wheel. The dashboard glow traced the edges of my hands in a pale blue line, and everything else, the row of identical porches, the patchy lawn, the recycling bins left out too long, blurred into that quiet suburban stillness people mistake for safety. Her porch light flickered again. It always flickered. The cheap sensor picked up moths, dust, sometimes nothing at all. I'd watched it from my car before, more times than she would ever believe. My phone lay on my thigh, screen open. Her message, can you come over? Just you. She thought she was confiding in a friend. She didn't know I had been rehearsing this moment for months. The manila folder on the passenger seat felt heavier than paper had any right to feel. I had smoothed the corners so many times that the edges had gone soft. Inside were printouts I should never have had, screenshots, timestamps, notes I wrote in the margins during my lunch breaks. Dates when he worked late. Days their kid was sick. Times she posted selfies looking tired. None of it meant much alone, but together it painted a picture she never meant to show me. Her porch light flicked on again, throwing that stuttering brightness across her front steps. Through the sliver of open blinds in the living room, I could see the shape of a lamp, the soft yellow glow, the curve of the couch arm. Domestic things. Warm things. Things that looked like they belonged to someone who didn't even realize how fortunate she was. My phone buzzed. Doors unlocked. I didn't get out right away. My fingers tapped against my thigh once, deliberate, to see if the tremor would come back. It didn't. I felt calm enough to scare myself. My eyes caught on the same detail they always did, that broken ceramic planter beside her steps. The dead rosemary sticking up like a brittle warning finger. Months ago, I had tried to convince myself that tiny thing meant something bigger. Neglect. Distraction. Proof she didn't deserve the life she had. But that night changed everything. He texted around 8:30 p.m. "Can we talk? In person?" I stared at the screen, the light from it reflecting off the glass on my coffee table. "Now," I wrote. "If you're free," he replied. "I'm walking. Needed to get out of the house. I'm near your place." That last sentence told me more than he intended. "Come up," I typed. "You know the way." He did. He arrived damp from the evening air, jacket sprinkled with fine mist, hair mussed from his hand dragging through it. My apartment smelled like reheated leftovers and cheap candle wax. I'd seen myself in this space so many times, alone. Seeing him in it felt like a photo that had finally developed. He dropped onto my couch without asking, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. His shoulders were tense, jaw tight. "We had another fight," he said, staring at the floor. "Over nothing. Over everything." She asked if I still loved her. I didn't answer fast enough. That was the wrong answer. I sat in the chair opposite him, not too close. "What did you want to say?" I asked quietly. He let out a breath. "I don't know. That I love the idea of what we built. The kid, the house, the history. But I don't recognize myself in it anymore. Every time I try to bring it up, she hears I hate you." So I stopped. He rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. They were red at the edges. "I'm not a victim," he said. "I know I've screwed up. I've made choices I shouldn't have." He glanced at me, then away. "But I can't keep pretending this is working just because we used to be good together." I watched him. I thought about all the nights Emma had called me, blaming herself, twisting his distance into a reflection of her own worth. "Have you told her that?" I asked. "Exactly that. She can't hear it," he said. "To her, anything less than we're perfect is betrayal." I let that sit for a moment. "You know she thinks she's the only one trying," I said. He laughed once, a sound with no humor. "Of course she does." A silence settled, the kind that feels like a hinge. "You deserve to be somewhere you can breathe," I said finally, "where you don't spend every day apologizing for existing." It was a simple sentence. It landed like a verdict. He looked up at me then, really looked. Eyes tired, but clear. "Where is that?" he asked. "Because it's not there anymore." I didn't say here. I didn't have to. He shifted from the couch to the floor, crossing the small space between us. His hand brushed my knee, like he was checking if something solid was actually there. "I'm so tired," he said again, softer this time. I reached out and rested my fingers lightly on his shoulder. "Only that. A small, human touch. You don't have to decide everything tonight," I said. "But you do have to stop living in a place that's already gone." He closed his eyes. When he leaned forward, it wasn't impulsive this time. It was deliberate, slow. The air between us felt heavier. My heart beat fast, but my breathing stayed steady. I knew what I was doing. So did he. No one could call it a mistake after that. The separation process took months. Real life is paperwork and logistics, not sudden suitcase scenes. He moved into a short-term rental first. A furnished corporate apartment with bland artwork and neutral couches. He sent me a photo of the view the first night, a parking lot and a strip mall. "Not exactly homey," he wrote. "It's a start," I replied. Emma cycled through phases. Anger, bargaining, silence. She called me less, texted even less. The last message she sent was short. "You knew," she wrote. "You chose your side. I won't forget that." I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't answer. There was nothing I could send that wouldn't be a lie or a confession. She blocked me a day later. The chat thread grayed out. Her profile picture disappeared. Mutual acquaintances filled in the gaps. She was seeing a therapist. She was staying with her sister some weekends. She'd hired a lawyer. There were custody discussions, asset splits, mediated sessions in bland rooms with water pitchers on cheap tables. My name came up in those rooms. I wasn't there when it did, but I saw the results. "Officially," he told me once, picking at the label on his beer bottle at my kitchen table, "you're just another party." Unnamed. She could have pushed for more, dragged you into it. She didn't. "Why?" I asked. He shrugged, eyes on his hands. "I think she just wants it over." And maybe, she knows I left for more than one reason. Even if you hadn't been there, it wasn't good anymore. Even if, the words hung in the air between us. We both knew they weren't entirely true. There's always a catalyst. The first time he brought a box of his things into my apartment, it was anticlimactic. No big speech. No keys ceremonially handed over. Just a cardboard box held awkwardly against his chest, the door bumping his hip as he walked in. "This okay here?" he asked, setting it down near the couch. "Yeah," I said, moving my own stack of magazines to make space. "We'll figure it out." The box smelled faintly like his old house, detergent, something floral that must have been Emma's fabric softener. He opened the flaps and started taking out items, a mug, some books, a photo frame he turned face down before setting it aside. He didn't move in all at once. It was gradual. Shirts in my closet, a spare toothbrush, his laptop on my table. One day there were 2 pairs of shoes by the door instead of 1. From the outside, it looked like a new relationship settling into place. Coworkers raised eyebrows when they realized he and I were spending more time together. Some gossiped, some didn't bother hiding it. We didn't announce anything. There were no social media posts, no couple photos, no big declarations. Too many people knew the overlapping timelines. At night, when he fell asleep next to me, I could feel the weight of him in the bed, real, warm, breathing. The thing I had wanted from a distance now existed in the same small space as my chipped nightstand and thin curtains. Sometimes, in the half-dark, his phone would light up on the dresser with a new message, a logistics text about pickup times, school events, doctor's appointments. His thumb hovered over the screen before he answered, choosing words carefully. "This is the part no one posts about," he said once, tossing the phone back down, screen dark. "Coordinating who gets Christmas Eve and who gets Christmas morning." "You're doing your best," I said. He sighed, staring at the ceiling. "So is she, probably. Just in a way I don't fit into anymore." He reached for my hand. I let him lace his fingers between mine. We lay there in silence for a while. From the outside, you might have called it a win. I'd wanted him. Now he was here. On paper, I'd gotten what I'd been staring at through a screen for months. But the paper trail behind us, emails, court dates, report numbers, her blocked contact, didn't dissolve just because his toothbrush sat next to mine now. One weekday morning, months later, I woke up before him. The apartment was quiet. Light slid in through the blinds in thin lines, striping the wall. His breathing was steady, turned slightly toward me, one hand resting on the blanket between us. I slipped out of bed carefully, feet finding the familiar cool patch of floor by the side. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle. The metal clicked as it heated. The small sounds of morning built themselves, water, cupboard doors, the rustle of a cereal box. On the fridge, a school photo of his son was held up by a magnet, the kind of cheap studio picture they take against a blue background. It had arrived in a paper envelope he'd brought over one afternoon, a little guilty when he showed it to me. "Is it weird if I put this up here?" he'd asked. I'd shrugged. "If he's part of your life, he's part of our life." My phone buzzed on the counter with a calendar alert. A reminder I'd set months ago, follow up with HR, 23-0419 closed. I'd forgotten to delete it. I stared at the number on the screen for a second. That case file, somewhere in a server, carried my name and his in a story pared down into bullet points. Boundary concerns, informal relationship, mitigation actions. It didn't say anything about envy, or late-night calls, or broken planters with dead rosemary. I turned off the alarm and cleared the reminder. In the living room, one of his cardboard boxes still sat half unpacked near the wall. A framed picture poked up over the edge, him, Emma, and their son at some beach years ago. I picked it up, his arm around her shoulders, her head tipped toward him, the boy on his hip, sun in his hair. I looked at their faces, then at mine and the glass reflection layered faintly over them. They had looked, at one point, like the version of life I thought would make everything fall into place. I set the frame back in the box, face down. When he woke up, he padded into the kitchen, hair flattened on one side, t-shirt creased. He kissed my shoulder in passing, hand briefly warm on my back. "Smells good," he murmured, nodding toward the coffee. I poured 2 mugs. The steam rose in thin lines. We sat at the table, the same one I'd once sat at alone, scrolling through his wife's posts, constructing meanings out of pixels. Now, he stirred sugar into his cup, spoon clinking the ceramic. A small, ordinary sound. "Custody hearing next week," he said. "Lawyer thinks it'll be straightforward. We've agreed on most of it." "That's good," I said. My voice was quiet. He nodded, staring into the coffee. "Yeah, it's just final, you know?" I thought of Emma's last text. You knew. You chose your side. Are you okay? I asked. He considered the question, then gave a small, tired smile. I don't know if okay is the word, but I'm not pretending anymore. That has to count for something. He reached across the table and rested his hand over mine. His palm was warm, calloused at the base of his fingers from some hobby he used to have time for. I squeezed back, part reflex, part choice. From the hallway, the morning light reached the edge of the cardboard box, glancing off the glass of the buried frame. The apartment smelled like coffee and laundry detergent and the faint, stale scent of last night's takeout container in the trash. This was what I had wanted. On the surface, his presence, his toothbrush, his coffee mug on my table, his handwriting on sticky notes stuck to my fridge. Underneath it all, there was another layer I couldn't ignore, even if I never said it out loud. Every step that had led here, every time I'd listened, nodded, and used someone's pain as a stepping stone. I stayed by the door longer than I needed to after he left for work, palm still on the deadbolt, metal cooling under my skin. From the hallway, I could hear the distant sounds of the building coming back to life, pipes clicking somewhere above me, a door closing one floor down, the faint whine of someone's vacuum starting up too early. I walked back into the kitchen, picked up my mug from the rack, and then set it down again without pouring more coffee. The movement felt automatic, like I was fulfilling some tiny script I'd already run 100 times. Only this time there was a thin edge of awareness pressed against every gesture. I had what I wanted. That fact sat in the room with me like another piece of furniture. So did everything I had done to get here. For a while I just stood in the middle of the apartment, not touching anything. It gave me a strange, clear view. 2 mugs in the sink from yesterday. The cardboard box with the frame turned face down. His shoes by the door, toes pointed inward like he was ready to come back later. The school photo on the fridge, the boy's eyes fixed on some photographer's shoulder just to the left of the camera. It occurred to me that if someone walked in right then and took a picture, the scene would look ordinary. Slightly cluttered, lived in, unremarkable. Anyone scrolling past it on a feed would file it under normal life. Nothing in the frame would show the conversations I'd nudged sideways, or the nights I'd answered texts from both of them and translated their pain into something that served me. I thought about that word, serve. I had never said it out loud, but it was accurate. I had stood in the middle and rearranged pieces until they landed in a pattern that benefited me, and I'd done it while calling myself supportive, loyal, attentive. All traits that sounded positive until you traced the outcomes. I walked over to the table and picked up my phone. I scrolled back through old calendar notifications until I found it again. Follow up with HR, 23-0419 closed. I tapped it open. The entry contained only a few words, boundary discussion, work plus personal. That was all I'd written. Enough to remind myself, not enough to explain anything to anyone else. I remembered that afternoon clearly now. The bland meeting room. The HR manager with the practiced neutral expression. The way I'd framed my relationship with him as supportive mentorship and client relationship maintenance. The words had been technically true and emotionally dishonest at the same time. They had told me to be careful, to document, to keep things transparent and above board. They'd mentioned the importance of not becoming a point of tension in a client's marriage. The phrase had been so gentle it almost sounded harmless. I had nodded, signed the follow-up email, and then continued doing exactly what I was already doing, only with more careful phrasing and better screenshots. I stared at the little block of text on my phone until my eyes blurred. Then I closed the calendar and opened the browser instead. I didn't have some dramatic epiphany or cinematic shift in that moment. It was quieter than that, more procedural. The way you realize a file has been mislabeled and decide to correct it before it causes more trouble. I typed slowly into the search bar, relationship boundary issues therapist near me. The suggestions that popped up underneath felt almost mocking in their accuracy: emotional affair therapist, codependency support, individual counseling infidelity. These weren't words I had ever attached to myself. I had attached them to other people, to Emma, when I mentally criticized her for being too much. To him, when I framed his behavior as avoidant or conflict-averse. Seeing them lined up like that under my own search made something settle in my chest in a way it hadn't before. Not a heavy weight, more like a label finally being put on the right folder. I clicked one of the results more or less at random. A local counseling center, beige website, stock photos of people in neutral-toned sweaters looking thoughtful over coffee. It looked like every other site like it, which was strangely reassuring. I scrolled until I found a section about patterns that cause harm in close relationships. The language was careful, non-judgmental, the way all of this was designed to be. Still, I caught on a phrase, repeated choices that prioritize control or validation over honesty. I had done that, repeatedly. No matter how soft my voice had been on the phone, no matter how gentle my texts had looked when screenshotted. I clicked on the intake form. The page loaded a simple set of fields: name, contact information, preferred days and times, brief description of concerns. For a second my fingers hovered over the keyboard, the way they had hovered over the car door handle that first night outside their townhouse. This, too, was a threshold. In the box that asked, "What brings you in?" I started typing. Recurring patterns in how I involve myself in other people's relationships, I wrote. Difficulty respecting boundaries when I feel needed. Acknowledging that some of my actions have hurt others, even when I told myself I was helping. The words looked clinical and distant on the screen, but they were the closest I'd come to a direct admission. I didn't soften it with explanations about my childhood or fears of being alone. Those might be relevant later, but right now they felt like excuses waiting in the wings. I added one more sentence: I know some of what I've done is wrong, and I don't want to keep repeating it. The word wrong sat there plainly. No qualifiers. No quotation marks. I filled in the rest of the form: my phone number, email, the insurance details I'd been putting off dealing with. At the bottom there was a checkbox asking if it was okay for them to leave a voicemail. I ticked it, hesitated, then also checked the box giving permission for email contact. When I hit submit, nothing dramatic happened. The page refreshed. A polite confirmation message appeared, thanking me for reaching out and promising a response within a few business days. I took a screenshot of that, too, out of habit. Evidence that I had done this, in case I tried to tell myself later that I hadn't. I set the phone down on the table and listened to the apartment again. The fridge hummed, pipes knocked once in the wall. Somewhere outside a car alarm chirped twice, unlocking. It struck me then that no one else knew I had just done that. Not him. Not Emma. Not any of the mutual acquaintances who whispered their versions of the story in other kitchens and offices and parking lots. To them, I had already chosen my side and stayed there. Seeking help wasn't going to change what had already happened. Therapy wouldn't undo the text messages or erase the nights I'd spent lying in bed stitching their words into a pattern that served me. It wouldn't give Emma back the version of our friendship that existed before I started looking at her life like something to be acquired. But it might change what I did next. And the next time after that. I walked over to the fridge and looked at the boy's photo again. The magnet was slightly crooked. I straightened it without really thinking. His smile was still too big for his face. His hair stuck up a little on one side, probably from a rushed morning and an impatient parent smoothing it down just before the photo. I knew that nothing I did now would keep the story of his parents' separation from becoming part of his life. That was already set in motion, written into custody schedules and school forms that asked for 2 addresses instead of 1. I had helped write that story, even if my name never appeared anywhere on the paperwork. What I could do, maybe, was make sure I didn't keep inserting myself into other people's lives in the same way and calling it care. I took a pen from the drawer and pulled a sticky note from the stack near the phone. On it, I wrote the date and the words therapist intake submitted. I stuck it inside the cupboard door where I kept the mugs. Somewhere I would see it every morning without it becoming part of the visible landscape of the fridge. That way, the reminder was for me, not for display. I thought briefly about writing to Emma. Not a message begging forgiveness, not some long explanation where I laid out all my reasons and hoped she would understand. Just a factual acknowledgement. A sentence or 2 admitting that I had crossed lines and hurt her. But she had blocked me. The last choice she had made that intersected with mine was to cut the line between us. For now, the most respectful thing I could do was to leave it cut. Any message I tried to route around that boundary would be more of the same. Maybe one day, if there was a channel that didn't feel stolen or forced, I could send something brief and honest, without asking for anything back, without framing it as mutual blame. For the moment, the only confession I could make was in that intake form and in the small, steady steps I decided to take afterward. By mid-morning, emails from work had started to stack up. I opened my laptop, answered the ones that needed immediate responses, flagged others for later. Somewhere between scheduling a meeting and reviewing a proposal, an email arrived from the counseling center. It was practical: available time slots, intake procedures, a note about fees. I read it twice, then replied with my preferences. Tuesday evenings. Willing to do video sessions if in person wasn't available right away. There was no rush of relief after hitting send, just a mild, unfamiliar sense that I had taken a step toward putting my own behavior under the same scrutiny I love to apply to other people's. Around noon, he texted to say his morning had been chaos and he'd be home late. He added a line about the custody hearing next week, how he was trying to prepare himself. I typed back a neutral, supportive response. I didn't launch into a long analysis of his ex's motivations. I didn't suggest phrasing for his next email to her. I didn't offer to proofread anything. For the first time in a long time, I held back from stepping into the middle of a situation that wasn't actually mine to manage. After I hit send, I set the phone face down on the table and left it there. In the quiet that followed, I could feel the outline of who I'd been more clearly. The part of me that thrived on being the indispensable listener, the trusted interpreter, the person everyone came to when things fell apart. There was comfort in that role, and power, and a way to avoid looking at the emptiness in my own life. Naming it as wrong didn't make that pull disappear. I could already tell that whatever work lay ahead in those therapy sessions wasn't going to be about one relationship or one sequence of events. It was going to be about the pattern underneath, the part of me that watched other people's lives like they were windows and measured my worth against them. I rinsed my breakfast plate, set it in the drying rack next to the cup. The hot water stung a little where it hit the skin near my nails. It brought me back fully into my body, into the simple fact of being here, in this kitchen, on this particular day. I was not a good person who had made only good choices. I was not a villain in a neat story arc either. I was a person who had known better at several key moments and had chosen what I wanted anyway. Now I was a person who had finally written the word wrong next to those choices and asked for help changing them. When I turned off the tap, the apartment fell back into its small, familiar sounds. Fridge, pipes, distant traffic. My own breathing, steady as ever, no longer something I trusted as proof of righteousness, just a fact of being alive. I walked from room to room once, not checking for anything in particular, just registering what was mine to control and what wasn't. The box in the corner, the photo in the cupboard, the intake email already sitting in my sent folder. By the time I sat down again at the table, the decision felt less like a revelation and more like a signed form. Official, mundane, quietly binding. I couldn't undo what I had broken to get here. That reality would stay written into other people's lives no matter what I did next. But I could stop telling myself that careful breathing and steady hands made my choices justified. I could stop pretending that being attentive excused the harm. And I could, step by unremarkable step, learn how to want things without bending other people's lives around my hunger. That, more than anything, was why I had reached out for help. Somewhere in the middle of all this, my footsteps changed. They sounded the same on the floor, solid, measured, but I knew I was no longer walking just toward the life I'd taken. I was also walking toward the work of understanding why I'd taken it in the first place. That work would be slow. It would happen in quiet rooms with neutral furniture, under soft lamps, across a series of Tuesday evenings that would probably blur together if I tried to recall each one later. It wouldn't erase anything. But it would be mine to do, fully, without anyone else paying the cost for my refusal to look at myself. And that, finally, felt like the only kind of victory I had any right to seek. I took a slow breath. The room felt balanced in a way that didn't need drama, just facts. I hadn't lost him. I had him, fully, now, publicly, eventually. But the cost lived in the quiet, in the empty space where a friendship used to be, in a house across town where a woman I once hugged in a messy kitchen now rearranged her life without either of us in it.